Hey, this is Cody Horton. I just want to welcome you to this webinar on unlocking your diversity recruiting strategies. I'm going to share 5 keys to help you unlock your diversity recruiting strategy. We'll be taking questions in the chat window. So if you've got a question, definitely feel free to put it in the chat window. Daniel and I'll be paying attention to the chat window and we'll answer any questions. If I don't get all the questions answered today, then I will answer questions via email or reach out to you after the webinar. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I've been doing this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on my background, but I've been doing this for a couple of decades, helping companies with their diversity recruiting strategies and really helping them create what I call an ecosystem for an inclusive workplace. So one of the things that I think is most important is for us to just talk about what is and level set on what a diversity recruiting strategy is. In my opinion, the diversity recruiting strategy is that ecosystem that you're creating. It's not a project. It's not a one-time, one and done kind of project. It's not an initiative, but it is really an ongoing, living approach to building an ecosystem that allows you to actually build an inclusive workplace so that you can have your employees be as successful as they possibly could be. One of the keys to starting your diversity recruiting strategy is just to make sure that you understand why you even have a diversity recruiting strategy. And the why is critical because everything else that you do, you want to be able to link it back to the why. And so a lot of times I know we want to get started on just building out the steps, building out the processes, building out those things. But the strategy, it's important for you to start with the why. And what you want to do is you want to be able to establish criteria that you're going to be using in that strategy so that you can then see how you're doing and how you're progressing as you move forward. So understanding the importance of DEI in your organization is important. Is it to connect with great people and to create that inclusion in your company? Is it to make sure that you're reaching a broader customer base and getting more customers into your company? Or is it just to take the people that have come to your company and given them the best opportunity to start and grow their careers to make an impact? And in some cases, is it because, hey, it just feels like the right thing to do as a good social and corporate citizen? So spend some time thinking about why you're even doing this before you even get started, and then create a sustainable plan that allows your workforce to stay with your organization, to grow with your organization. And you want to apply the principles from your strategy in attracting, hiring, onboarding, developing, and retaining great talent. So one of the first steps after the strategy is just to create a framework. You want to be able to create a framework that allows you to have the guidelines and the roadmap for how you're going to put your efforts into action. For instance, if you outline what organizations you're going to get involved with, what processes you're going to have, you want to lay that out. So some of the big things that go in creating this framework is you want to put high level, the why piece. Then you want to make sure that you identify what are the branding opportunities. How do you build credibility with the brand? Because what you're doing is you're going to be engaging organizations and communities that may not know your company. If they know your company, that's great. They already know your brand, and maybe it's your corporate brand, but do they know your employment brand? Will your framework include how you're going to reach out, right? If you just show up to a national event and expect to get great engagement from the candidates, you're probably going to be a little bit disappointed. And so my recommendation is within the framework, what you do is you want to take a multi-touch approach, meaning you want to engage those communities at the local level so that they know locally what you're doing and they recognize your brand. You also want to engage them at the regional level as a realistic and ideal next step And then you want to be able to engage them at the national level. So the people and the resources and the cost for engaging at each level are going to be different, but you need to build on the relationship building that you have. So local engagement, regional engagement, national engagement, and in some cases, you're going to have international engagement where you're internationally engaging in various regions. So if you're a global company, you may be engaging in Europe, you may be engaging in the Middle East or in Africa or in not just North America, but in Central and South America. You may be engaging in Asia. So you want to engage in the regions on that local level, that regional level, and that national level within the geographies that you're trying to work for and reaching the demographics that you're trying to reach for. Now, there is always a challenge when it comes to engagement. You've got to resource it. You've got to have a budget. There are lots of ideas that people have on how you need to engage and what you want to do after creating this framework. Part of what you want to have in the framework is, how do we pay for this, right? How do we make sure that we've got the right resources? Because if you get a list of places that you want to go out and recruit diverse talent, everyone can come up with an idea because everyone knows about some diverse organization. You can't do everything. And so my advice is, don't try to boil the ocean. What I suggest you do is create some kind of tiering mechanism. So in my case, I'm going to talk about tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. And a tier 1 is a company-wide engagement that has resources from the company, it has budget from the company, and it probably has whole company involvement when it comes to attending events, doing interviews, posting jobs. A tier 2 organization is an organization that may be specific to a specific department in your company. So finance may want to engage diverse talent at a specific event, but it's all finance and accounting people, so that wouldn't be appropriate for the whole company. It still might be a tier 1, but in most cases, it's a tier 2 organization that you're going to engage. And it's because the finance department is going to fund that. If IT wants to engage an organization, you may get the funding and the resources from IT, although you have people from all over the company involved. IT is the lead on that. So that's the tier 2. And then a tier 3 allows you to say yes to a lot of the other organizations that are on your list. For example, if your CEO has a certain school that's their alma mater and they go every year, you want to be able to help the CEO be successful, but you're not going to provide company resources, company-wide resources, and you're probably not going to provide divisional resources. What you are going to provide is insight and ways that you can get the people into your recruiting process who may have met the CEO and the CEO was impressed with this person, or it might be your boss, right? Your boss wants to go to this event. You've determined that based on the criteria that you have, this isn't a tier 1 or a tier 2 event, but it's an organization that your boss is part of. They're an alumni of the organization. And so you want to be able to create a process and give them a playbook on the things that they can do to get people in. And you also might want to give them collateral, things that they can give away, specific jobs that you may know about. All those are things that go into being able to set them up for success, even though it's not a tier 1 or a tier 2 event. It also gives you a way to say yes to more things. College recruiting is a perfect example. There are only so many schools that you can physically go to in a year with a recruiting team. So you may have tier 1 schools, tier 2 schools, and tier 3 schools. Those tiered schools, if you have tier 3 in there, it allows you to do some outreach to those schools, which may be virtual. It may be through email. It may be through their alumni who are going, where you give them a playbook and it gives them the opportunity to know what they're doing. So I want to just pause for a second and just look to make sure there's no to see if there are any questions. And so I've got a question. It says, what metrics should we use as part of the diversity recruiting strategy? I'm going to talk a little bit about metrics a little bit later, so I'm going to push that one just right now, but I'll get to that one a little bit later. And then it said, who should take, here's a question, it says, who should take lead in diversity recruiting strategy if we're just getting started? No, this is a great one. So with your diversity recruiting strategy, you want to find somebody, one, who's passionate about it. They may not be the head of recruiting, but it's somebody who's passionate about it. The criteria, though, to make sure your diversity recruiting strategy is successful is make sure you've got leaders in there. You've got leaders who are going to support and champion your diversity recruiting efforts, because you can't do this alone. And I said that this is not an initiative and it's not a project that comes to an end. This is an ongoing process. So one of the things that I would suggest is create a working group or a steering committee or a council that has people from all the different areas in your company who can get involved. They might, if your company already has employee resource groups or business resource groups, or just people who are passionate about social justice or about growing an inclusive workforce, what you want to be able to do is have people come together, because what that group, and I'll call it a steering committee, you may call it a council, you may call it anything, but what those people are going to be able to do is they're going to be able to collect best practices. Someone may be doing something in another part of your company that no one knows about. And if they can bring those ideas and the things that they're doing to the table, that will allow those ideas to get shared across the company, across the organization, and it gets more people doing the kind of work that's going to allow you to have an impact and make a difference. For instance, you could have within your division people who are passionate about diversity, and they're out helping you figure out how to hire the best software developers or the best IT people. Those people, and you could have that across multiple divisions. So you may have finance has one, HR has one, but all those people are going to bring ideas, and they would bring it to this working council, this working group, or steering committee that you have, and then share those best practices across the company. And so let me see if there's another. So I see another question. What do we do if our staff gives us pushback on diversity strategy, the diversity strategy we want to use? How can we convince them this is the right thing to do? So there's two areas of pushback here. I think that's a great question. One of the areas of pushback is, should we be doing this diversity thing at all? And that's why I go back to the original point, is understand the why and be able to talk about why you're doing this. Because when you get an inclusive, and I think the focus should be on inclusion, right? Diversity is about the differences. Inclusion is about taking advantage of the differences that people bring to the table, whether it's neurodiversity, whether it's something with gender or ethnicity or race or disability or anything. You want to be able to bring those capabilities to the table, because then it allows you to solve more problems. And so the way, I wouldn't say you're trying to convince them to do it. The way you get people on board is you look at the power of creativity by having more diverse thought in the company. I look at diversity very broadly. Now, although a lot of companies are looking at just the demographics of gender or race, but that's not the way to look at this. The way to look at this is more inclusively and bringing in all the demographics and the ideas and the thoughts and the things that come together. And that's where those ideas and thoughts from all the people that are in your company would input to this steering committee or this working group, so that you have a better idea what people stand for. And there might be products that you're trying to develop or services that you're developing that they just might not happen if you didn't have someone who was aware of it. And so those diverse backgrounds allow you to create better service and better support and better products for your customers. So one of the things that I think is important is to ensure that you've got inclusive practices when you operationalize your strategy. Because if you create a situation where you're excluding people from the process, they have a problem with that, and then they're going to push back. But if you create inclusive processes and you include everyone, because it's about all of us, and if you include everyone in those practices, it gets you to have better thoughts at the table. So be prepared for candidates who are different backgrounds, different ethnicity, all the differences that you're going to see. Make sure that your interviewers, you spend a lot of time going out to find these candidates. Make sure your interviewers understand how to conduct an inclusive interview. They also need to understand what's their unconscious bias that they may be presenting to the candidate, because the candidate's going to come to the table with their own bias. And so make sure your interviewers are able to recognize their bias and then be able to mitigate that bias by slowing down, asking questions that are from standardized interviews so that you don't get a bias related question in there, and just practicing. The whole key is practicing. It's also, if you think about your recruiting team, having them look in places that they normally wouldn't look, that unbiases the search process. And I do a training on search bias and how you take the bias out of your search process. So make sure that your candidates, make sure your interviewers are focused on providing those inclusive interviews. Make sure your recruiters are looking in places that they normally wouldn't look. They're engaging communities that they may not normally engage. Even in their social media posts, in their social media followers, are they following people and engaging people who are not like them, who don't look like them, who don't think like them, who didn't go to the same schools that they went to? So make sure that you're just taking a step back, going a little bit slower, making those connections with a broader group of people, and making sure that you're in a position to hire people who are different, because that's what's going to improve your diversity recruiting strategies and your efforts when you operationalize your diversity recruiting strategies. So let me look at got another question here. So I want to go back to this question on metrics, because everyone wants to measure, right? Metrics are so important and so critical. What you want to be able to do is use two kinds of metrics. So there's a metric that's internal to your organization that you want to measure. Hey, what's the existing diversity in our organization? What is the attrition and the retention in our organization? Look at things like, what are the promotion rates for all of the employees? And you can certainly break it down by gender and race and see, are there big differences in promotion rates? What are the attrition rates by those demographics, right? Is it meeting the standard? Right now, there's about a 20% attrition across the board. In your organization, is it meeting that? Is it meeting that standard, or is it different for different people who are in your organization that might actually give you insight on the things you might be able to do? Being inclusive, right? What's the retention rate for your company? What's the average tenure in your company? And those are all internal. If you go externally, you can look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics has lots of information around the demographics of the workforce. How many people are employed? How many people are working? What are the different levels of people? So I can share a guide that gives you information and some resources for diversity data, especially as it relates to employment. So let me look. I know we're coming on time, and I want to look just to see if I have any other questions here. I don't see any other questions. So one of the things that I want to be able to share with you is there are some companies, the tech space has been working on diversity and inclusion for a long time, at least as long as I've been doing this. And some of the things that are best practices that they've been using in the tech space that will apply to others is they're making sure they know the why. Why are we reaching out to this? Why are we trying to diversify their workforce? They know that. They understand what's important as they build out the criteria for their diversity recruiting strategies. They're taking a multi-touch approach. They're engaging regionally, locally, regionally, and nationally and internationally for a lot of these organizations. They're making sure they've got inclusive interview practices. Those are the things that go into this strategy and building the ecosystem. And then they're using the data. They're using internal data and they're using external data to make sure that they understand the landscape. And the biggest thing that they've done is they're having patience, right? They know that it takes time because they've been working on this for a while. So if you want to look at some companies, and I have the list of these companies and I have certainly links to their sites, but if you want to look at companies that are publishing their diversity reports, you can look at Google and Microsoft and Walmart. Those are organizations that are posting their data around their diversity. Facebook, they post their data. So you can go and look and see what's their hiring rate, what's the workforce look like, what are the demographics. And they also share, here are some best practices of things that we have done as a company to get from where we were to where we are. So I just say, have a little bit of patience and focus on some of the things that I talked about. And I'm certainly always available to share any information and to go deeper in how you build the framework, how you build the strategy. I'm gonna look to see if there are any other questions, because I know we're at time. I don't see any other questions. If you do have a question, feel free to email me at cody@diverserecruitingexperts.com. If you want to know more about diversity recruiting and diversity sourcing, I'm happy to spend time with you and we can get you a plan to help you move forward with your diversity recruiting strategy and help you unlock that strategy. I appreciate you joining. Have a great day.